Hello and welcome to Who Is Best, a show where I, Claudine, take games that give you choices and rate those choices in a tier list. And if you like objective video game tier lists, then subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. It's been a while since we last examined a Final Fantasy game, so today we'll be looking at Final Fantasy III. The third installment in this now iconic series was never originally released in the West and only recently came over in a few different forms. The one we'll be looking at is the DS remake, which came with additional story beats, slightly more fleshed out characters, and some decent 3D graphics. There are more than 20 jobs that unlock through your playthrough, and each varies widely in usefulness. Each of the 4 party members can access any of these jobs and basically use them equally, so we'll be focusing strictly on which jobs are best for your playthrough and endgame. Oh, and stick around till the end where we'll reveal the optimal party for your playthrough. And now, without further ado, I give you the tier. The Onion Knight is a class locked behind a stupid internet gimmick that forces you to play with other players in order to unlock it, and some secret dungeons as well. I hate this stuff. Just ignore the Onion Knight. Next on this list is the Evoker. This is your summoner light. Summons can be pretty powerful and incredibly useful in a pinch, but not here. Evokers are unable to control the outcome of a summon. When summoning, you get either an offensive attack or a defensive buff, and the outcome is random. This makes any strategy go out the window and leaves this guy as the worst class in the game. Last on the tier is the Ranger. Ranger really is here because it's just absolutely outclassed in every single way. There is nothing the Ranger does that another class can't do better. The low tier. First on the low tier is the Scholar. Now, a lot of you might be thinking that the Scholar belongs in the tier as well, but there are a few things that are going for it. First, it has some of the highest intelligence in the game and can do double damage with attack items. Sure, this doesn't make them some crazy broken class, but if you want to take a Scholar to the end game, there is a small light at the end of that tunnel. Next is the Geomancer. Geomancers call upon the land around them to make a random target attack that costs 0 MP. The biggest issue here is that you miss out on exploiting elemental weaknesses of enemies most of the time. Generally, if you're in a water area, the enemies will have an affinity to water, so yeah, better to just use Black Mage. And speaking of Black Mage, the final member of the low tier is the Black Mage. This class is great and can be a powerhouse. Heck, you could take a Black Mage to the end, but unfortunately the classes that replace it are pretty much straight up upgrades. The Sage or Magus will always be the better choice in the end. Alright, we're going to break the mid-tier up into 2 parts since we have so many classes, so we'll start with the lower mid-tier. First up is the Bard. The Bard is surprisingly good in Final Fantasy III. First, its physical attack is surprisingly high for a support class and can hang with the other physical attackers on your party. Second, you get some amazing buffs and debuffs that can be pivotal in some of the more difficult fights. At the end of the day, this isn't really endgame material, but that doesn't make it a bad class. Next is the Red Mage. The Red Mage is probably the single best class for early and mid-game, sporting the most magical accessibility and decent physical attack. Unfortunately, like the Black Mage, this class is completely replaced by the Sage, making it obsolete. A White Mage is always a must in a party. Of the 3 main casters, Black Mage, Red Mage, and White Mage, the White Mage will probably stick around your party the longest. But then you'll unlock the Devout, and at that point, there's no longer a reason to use this class. The Dragoon is similar to the Knight, but with increased magical defense over physical defense. I think overall the physical defense is more important, but magical defense is definitely needed at times. Unfortunately, when you get the Ninja, there will no longer be a need for this Leaping Dragon. The Warrior is one of the first physical damaging classes you get, and would be good if it wasn't replaced pretty quickly by the Knight, then later by the Ninja. Now, I will say this, Advance can dish out some awesome damage, but sacrificing a little bit damage for survivability, better equipment, and just overall more utility is worth it in the end. Final member of the lower mid-tier is the Monk. The Monk can be an incredibly cheap powerhouse with the right amount of time. His speed is a concern, but no means makes him a bad early game choice. Now, the Monk is pretty much replaced by the Black Belt, but until then, this is not a bad route to take your main attacker. The upper mid-tier. The Thief is generally overlooked in this game. There's the normal stuff that this class brings, which is stealing items and running from battle. Stealing items eventually becomes useless, and running, though nice, isn't really required. But given the right equipment, the thief can keep itself viable as an attacker via its incredible speed and similar loadout to a ninja. The Summoner is your magical DPS and can wipe the floor with every enemy in the game. Your summons now serve a single purpose: damage output, and they do it well. The Magus is quite controversial online. In fact, this class was one of the hardest to place. This is your powered up version of a Black Mage, but it's difficult to decide if ultimately it's better than the Sage. And no one online seems to agree either. So here it is. I'm setting this class on the upper mid tier, and you can all fight about it in the comments below. The Knight is your most diverse physical class for the majority of the game. This class is the second best tank in the game and can come close to matching the Warrior's damage output. Now, the Dark Knight, Dragoon, and especially the Viking contend for best spot here, and I think a lot is left to player preference, but you just can't go wrong with the Knight. The Dark Knight is the most useful class for taking out annoying mobs. It can attack all enemies the same despite placement on the battlefield, but the Dark Knight suffers during boss battles and isn't as useful come the late game. The final member of the upper mid tier is the Sage. The Sage can use certain summons, white magic, and black magic, making it the ideal over the Red Mage. Now, you do sacrifice the physical damage of the Red Mage and the high MP of the focused magic classes, but that still isn't enough to deter the Sage from being one of the best endgame magic users in Final Fantasy III. The top tier. The Viking can't hit to save its life, and thus it struggles to dish out any damage. But that doesn't matter. The reason to use the Viking is as a tank. Set the Viking in the back row and draw all attacks from the enemy while the rest of your party goes to town. There is no better tank in the game. The Black Belt, with quite a bit of work, can be a contender for best damage dealer in the game. The issue here is that you're incredibly squishy and quickly become a Phoenix Down nuisance. If you're going with the Black Belt, make sure you pair it with a Viking that can help take some of the heat off. The God tier. There are two classes in the God tier, the first being the Devout. This is the best supporting class in the game, with incredibly high magic and access to the best white magic, including spells like Holy and Tornado. This is a must for any endgame team. The final member of the God tier and top of this list is the Ninja, because why not? Throw is strictly unfair when it comes to damage, and the Ninja can equip any weapon in the game. This class has higher magical defense than Dragoon and incredible agility. The biggest issue you'll run into is their abysmal physical defense, but given the Vikings' tanking capabilities, who cares? Now, as for optimal party, if you're planning on using the Ninja or Black Belt, then you have to have the Viking as a tank. The Viking should be supported by a Devout as well. That leaves two open slots for DPS. Ninja, Black Belt, Summoner, or Magus are your best choices in the endgame, but it's up to the player. My recommended party would be a Ninja, Viking, Devout, and well, whatever you want. And that's my list. I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know what your endgame team is in the comments below, and thanks for watching.